Thomas and Friends Season 11 first premiered on the 3rd of September 2007 in the UK and the 9th of September 2007 in the US. Michael Brandon and Michael Angeles returned to narrate. The series was produced by Simon Spencer, directed by Steve Asquith, and the music was composed by Robert Hartshorn. This was the first series to be filmed digitally at 1080p high definition, and it was also the last season to solely rely on resin faces and the inanimate human models. And unlike the previous seasons, these episodes feature a very distinct yellow overlay, but I'll get to that in a minute. The new characters introduced this season were Whiff, Billy, Hector, and Madge. Now, according to Simon Spencer, the yellow overlay was used to give the impression that the show was still being recorded using film stock. And a lot of people didn't like this yellow overlay for season 11, to the point that a lot of people have tried to colour correct it. But you know what? I don't actually mind the yellow overlay. As a matter of fact, I don't actually mind season 11 at all. It's one of my preferred hit era seasons of Thomas and Friends. I think the yellow overlay gave it a little bit of a definition, something to make it stand out from the other seasons, because the other seasons were just becoming known as being the same kind of bland, generic, run-of-the-mill episodes that they had been. I actually find quite a few things to like about season 11. Could it be a case of Stockholm Syndrome by this point? Or do I just genuinely like season 11 as a whole? Well, that's why you're here, so we're going to get into it. Once again, these are all my own personal opinions. Your thoughts would be different than mine, and that's the one thing that makes Thomas fandom so unique. And let me know in the comments how you would rank Thomas and Friends season 11. All I ask is that you be respectful, and above all, enjoy the video. Okay, let's dive in. Number 26, Toby's Triumph. Written by Abby Grant, Toby has chosen to take Alicia Botti to a concert, but he's worried he'll mess up, and he does too many times. Okay, does that description describe Toby in the slightest in any characterisation of Toby that we know from Railway series or Classic era? Him worrying that he's constantly going to mess up, and then messing up constantly? No. And it's why I really just don't like this episode at all. It takes a beloved character of Toby and just continues to do the character assassination that we absolutely despise at this point. The only notable thing was that Alicia Botti was in it, and that we had Henrietta back. Aside from that, not much really to go into about it. Number 25, Skarloey Storms Through. Written by Neil Richards, Skarloey faces all of his worst fears when the Thing Controller orders him to rescue some upset lambs during a thunderstorm. Okay, this episode, originally I wrote that it was laughably bad. But then you realise that you're not laughing. It's just bad. It's got the same traits as Toby. Complete character assassination of a character that we know, that we love. In this case, it's Skarloey. I genuinely really do not like this episode at all for that. And I think the worst part is, I don't see who you could have gave this episode to out of any of the narrow gauge engines, even in this point in the franchise's history, and have a viable reason to give it to them. None of them would seem to have this type of trait. And I think that's the biggest offender of all, that it couldn't be saved by putting another engine in its lead role. Number 24, Edward in the Mail. Written by Paul Larson, Edward has chosen to pull the mail, but he does not know how to do the job and is worried to ask the other engines how. I think the frustrating part of this episode is that it started out so well. Everybody's in awe of Edward. There's a great description about him. It seems like they're finally giving him that bit of reverence. And then the entire episode goes and takes a big, massive dump on it from a great height. Because this isn't an Edward's character at all. He wouldn't be scared to ask how to do a job. He would go and ask Percy how to do a job. Especially if he's never done something before, because he would want to get it right. He wouldn't just hide away into himself and then create all the messes that happen as a result of not wanting to ask anybody for help. Now, I'd had a discussion with a fellow Thomas and Friends creator about this, and they mentioned that it wasn't more the poor, frail, pathetic Edward trope, it was more the fact that the other engines really look up to Edward and he doesn't want to be seen in a bad light. That I can kind of understand for any other engine, but this is Edward we're talking about. Someone who is wise enough to know his limitations, to know his flaws and faults, and get advice and help when needed. That's why I really don't like this episode. It's such an out of character episode, and I think the best way I can describe it, it's a nothing burger episode. There's no point to it whatsoever. It could easily be left on the cutting room floor and no one would notice. Number 23, Don't Be Silly, Billy. Written by Shannon Miller, a new orange engine named Billy ignores Thomas's advice and as a result, runs out of coal and water. I did a deep dive into this episode in my Sodor's Ball Bags video about Billy. So kind of like with Edward Strikes Out, I'm not going to go too much into it because I want you to go and check out that episode and really hear my thoughts on it. Because I don't necessarily like the episode, but I was able to peel back the layers of it and have a greater appreciation of it. Could it go up in my estimations maybe some point down the line? Possibly, but I think because season 11 has better episodes in general, that's why it is so far down for me. But if you put this episode in a season 10 or a season 9, it probably would be higher up the rankings. Number 22, Thomas and the Spaceship. Written by Sharon Miller, Thomas and Percy are certain they have seen a spaceship in the sky, when it's really Jeremy. Okay, you know that as well as me being a Thomas and Friends fan, I'm also a sci-fi fan. So, in theory, having this type of crossover should work, but it didn't. It managed to offend both things that I like. I don't know how they couldn't tell that it was Jeremy flying overhead and not spaceship. They've seen air vehicles before, they've seen Jeremy before. Even your basic target audience of kids and toddlers would have known that that was Jeremy. And I know that it's nighttime settings, guys, but would it kill you to just bump up the contrast a little bit? They talk about like colour grading the yellow tint. How about actually do some auto brightness correction so you can actually see what the feck is going on? And the more I look at this moon in Thomas and Friends, the more it looks like just a big round bit of blue cheese. But I like the sci-fi pheromone music that was used. Robert Hartshorn did a good job with that. Star Trek the original series vibes going on there. Number 21, Thomas and the Big Bang. Written by Abby Grant, Thomas plays jokes with the narrow gauge engines at the wharf instead of doing his job. Okay, I'd mentioned in other videos that there are episodes that I have a soft spot for if they were storybooks and I read them to my kids at bedtime. This was one of those episodes. But even then, I did have gripes with it. And the main ones are the narrow gauge engines being out of character. Scarlowe and Renace, yes, they are totally out of character. Sadly, this was the norm. But Sir Handel was also out of character in this. He is now the wise old sage of the narrow gauge engines. If he got pranked, he should have been the one to tell them to wrap their crap and get on with it before we get to inevitable third strike and something disastrous happens. He really should have been the one in Peter Sam's role, and Peter Sam in Sir Handel's. It would have made more logical sense. And then the whole premise of this is Thomas shouldn't be playing pranks, they shouldn't be joking around when they've got work to do, get the work done. And then they show they've got the work done by playing a prank. And Mr. Percival just laughs it off like, oh, you are such a prankster. Where he was ripping his proverbial bunker off, or doing just that earlier on. Kind of throws a bit of mixed messages into the air. But I still do have a soft spot for it because it does remind me of reading this story to my kids at bedtime. They enjoyed it, so it appealed to the target audience that they would have been looking for. Number 20, Thomas and the Stinky Cheese. Written by Paul Larson, Thomas tries to avoid Ari, Bert and Diesel while taking some stinky cheese. I find the backstory to this episode more interesting and thought-provoking than the episode itself. The episode is just your generic Steamies v Diesels, everybody gets their comeuppance in the end, job's a good one. But hearing that this episode was originally the test pilot for the CGI live action model hybrid that was coming in season 12 was so interesting to see. Even though the Diesel faces were absolutely terrifying. And Diesel's resin face, when he has that look of PU, what's that stinky cheese smell? That's still a creepy resin face. And I used to get creeped out by his angry face until I was 20. So it was a new face that haunted my nightmares for a little while. But there isn't anything really bad to say about this episode. There isn't really anything good to say about it either. But the behind the scenes story around it is more interesting. Number 19, Dream On. Written by Neil Richards, Thomas wants to be faster, shinier and stronger than Spencer. Where have we heard this story before? Thomas wants to be better than Spencer. He's not going to be better than Spencer in those statistics. But we get to prove that he's better than Spencer in certain ways all along. The main plus point is that Thomas kind of learns his lesson. But again, story we've seen 1,000,001 times with Thomas in this role, but it's passable. Number 18, Thomas and the Lighthouse. Written by Abby Grant, Thomas neglects his instructions of taking a light bulb carefully to the lighthouse when the engines become excited about a fair with fireworks. Why is nothing ever secured on a flatbed? It's a railway that transports precious cargo all of the time. Everything needs to be secure on the flatbeds, especially when engines like Thomas are known to crash constantly. Why not secure that bugger down? Because then there wouldn't be a story. It would have made more sense if Edward or Toby were in this role, because they are the slow and steady engines that would be required for a job like this. But then they use Edward for essentially a similar role in Steady Eddie in season 12, so yeah, this probably should have been a Toby episode. Number 17, Henry's Lucky Day. Written by Paul Larson, Edward takes Henry's so-called lucky trucks, and Henry goes looking for them. However, Henry breaks his lucky trucks after finding Edward. Okay, there's a generic trope that always happens with me in any media or anything in general that I find funny. And it's when your head kind of peeks over the precipice of something and then just slowly goes back down. I don't know why, but I always find that funny. I notice it when my cat does it, if she sits up at the dinner table and you just see her head pop over the table and then go back down to go for a snooze. So I think that's quite funny. So when Henry's head just popped over the top of Gordon's Hill and then went right back down, I did have a good chuckle over that. But the story of Henry having these lucky trucks is what brings it down for me. You get used to seeing character traits, and I was getting used to the Henry eco-warrior trait because it was something that was established. But this superstitious part of Henry was not something that I've seen before. It's interesting, and it's certainly a thing, but I never understood why it was used for this. But overall, I wouldn't say the story is bad. I wouldn't say it's great. It's just kind of meh. Number 16, Thomas in Trouble. Written by Wayne Jackman. After being teased by James, Thomas leaves the Flittershire to pick up a choir before he is fully maintained, which leads to a problem. 2 episodes in this season, both with repeating titles of episodes from the classic era. It was like they were trying to say, yes, we can have different episodes with the same title, and in this era, they'll be better. No, they're not. Could this not have been something that Abby Grant put in that bloody Thomas and Friends Writer's Bible? I think the thing that annoys me most about this was the whole clangety clong bit. It's more of that alliteration, rhyming speech that was very prevalent in this era, and then in other eras going forward. If only someone could have went back in time and told them, kids don't like this, please stop doing it. It would be greatly appreciated. And in general, Thomas in this episode is a bit of a bell end. Number 15, Smoke and Mirrors. Written by Neil Richards, Thomas confuses some deliveries for a magic show, but the magician puts him in the grand finale after Thomas fixes his mistake. I didn't like this episode. It's your basic pander to kids formula, using a magician, Thomas wanting to be a part of the grand finale, messing everything up, then winds up being a part of the grand finale anyway. There's no repercussions for his actions. I think it's a shame because there are some great episodes in this season, but they just get bogged down by filler dross like this. It's probably not even worth my time saying anything else about it. Number 14, Percy and the Left Luggage. Written by Abby Grant, Percy neglects his more important job of collecting the luggage from the Fat Controller's mother, Dowager Hat, in favour of his other more fun jobs. This is an episode that very easily could have been a Thomas and the Left Luggage, but they just substitute Percy in instead. And the story beats are exactly the same. Percy was on a good vein of form for me in terms of hit era episodes. And this one, while not terrible, is the weakest of his hit era episodes at this point in the franchise. And it's a formula that sadly becomes part of the franchise going forward as well, where they have a job to do, but they want to do other jobs instead because they are more fun rather than doing the job that's most important, and then leads to a big hash bash at the end to try and correct their mistakes. That little race between Percy and Sir Topham Hatt in his car was actually very well done. I like some of the camera work in it. It's not great, but at least with it being Percy in the lead role, it makes it okay. Number 13, Duncan Does It All. Written by Wayne Jackman, Duncan does Rusty and Scarlowy's jobs for a change for the afternoon, but he causes several muddles doing his jobs. It always seems like Thomas cannot be left out of a narrow gauge episodes in this era. He has to have a cameo in there just to use up his big gauge prop. Was it on commission or something? In this one, I can kind of still say that Duncan is in character a little bit because he wants the excitement, he wants the adventure, and that's kind of similar to what it was with Duncan in the old mine, in the sense that he's chasing that thrill and it just gets ahead of him and winds up causing an absolute mess. The Duncan episodes are generally alright, and this one was okay. I think it was passable, but similarly with Percy, I would say this is his weakest episodes of his hit era run, but it's much more passable than the other episodes I've mentioned on the list. Number 12, Thomas Sets Sail. Written by Shannon Miller, it is very windy, and Thomas loses control of his sailing boat while he pulls it, as a result of not waiting for the engineer to lower the mast. It's nice to see certain cameos. Elizabeth, Rosie, and Molly. And I have to say, I like the model work done for the sailboat. The story's quite simple, but it's enjoyable. Overall, I would say this was alright. Number 11, Wash Behind Your Buffers. Written by Paul Larson, Madge tells Scarloy and Renee's to keep clean for an engine rally, but she cannot keep clean herself. This was a character that I really liked that got introduced. Madge, little snub-nosed Laurie. She was kind of the Elizabeth of the narrow gauge engines. Older, maybe try and keep them in order, be a bit more responsible. Which is weird because I genuinely thought Elizabeth would have been that character for them, but who am I to judge? But it's still a very good character that was introduced in this season. And our stories were actually pretty good. Again, I think if you subbed out Scarloy and Rhaenys with season 4, Peter, Sam, and Sir Handel, or even this season, Peter, Sam, and Duncan, it would have been a better casting choice. And it would have made more sense in terms of a story. But it's a good episode. I always like seeing the island of Sodor from a different perspective. In this case, it's from the roads and not the rails. And it was certainly enjoyable. Number 10, Hide and Peep. Written by Simon Spencer, Thomas cheats at a game of hide and peep with Percy at Brendam Docks. It's another 3-strike formula. Thomas constantly cheating at hide and peep, so that Percy will reveal himself, and then he won't reveal himself when he's actually needed. We get the idea, we get the formula, but this one was alright. I find it quite ironic that Percy hid in a coal hopper, especially when we think back to season 6's middle engine, yet he seemed to be perfectly fine this time. I wonder what changed? The writer. It does seem a little bit out of character that Cranky would feel left out at being involved in something. Cranky normally doesn't care about being involved in games with useless little bugs like Thomas and Percy, but it is wise and quite good to include him in the story's conclusion. And getting to see Rocky is always a good thing. Number 9, Thomas and the Storyteller. Written by Abby Grant, Thomas shows a famous storyteller around all of Sodor, but keeps making favours to help all of his friends. This is where the 3 strikes formula is actually done well. It's a nice refreshing spin on it. Instead of the 3 strikes formula being used to the detriment of an engine, it's used to show a positive growth in an engine's character. And in this case, it's Thomas helping all the engines that he comes across. I thought the storyteller was quite funny. Had a little bit of sass about her, kind of like famous people do. And it's a very by-the-number story, but there was enough tweaks around it and enough creative twists that made it pretty enjoyable for me. Number 8, Thomas and the Runaway Car. Written by Sharon Miller. After trying to beat Gordon in the race, a runaway car causes trouble for the other engines, so Thomas tries to catch it. You all know what sequence that I liked in this, and it was the runaway car sequence itself. And why was that? The cameos. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a good chase. The crash for the car was also really well done. And Thomas and Gordon's dynamic is not messed with. They have their rivalry and their little bit of one-upmanship, but when everything goes to the inevitable downward swing, Gordon is there to help Thomas. And in turn, Thomas is kind to Gordon. But I did like the fact that Gordon wanted to make sure that he actually won first before he came back and helped. He just wanted to get his little bit of gloating in his moment in the sun first. Classic Gordon. Number 7, Ding-a-Ling. Written by Shannon Miller, Freddy tries to find a bell for the Thing Controller's new bicycle, but neglects asking James where to find one. Yes, I know. 3-strike formula. And yes, I know. It's your traditional 3-strike formula. But this is a good episode for Freddy. People might think that I'm being a bit of a hypocrite here, because I'm saying Edward not asking for advice. Bad, Edward. You're old, you should know better. But at the same time, good Freddy, not asking for advice. You should know better. But it's because Freddy is a completely new character with traits that we haven't worked out yet. Edward is an established character that they've just totally disrupted. Whereas Freddy, he is more like your kind of wacky older uncle. Someone that's still trying to show that he knows what's going on and isn't completely out of touch. But you also can't wait to see what mess they're going to get into. There's no real harm involved to him. He's just a bit ditzy. And that's what Freddy is. It's what makes him a lovable character for me, and not a character assassination like it would be if it was Edward. I like the execution of the story. I like that it gives you a bit more expansion of Freddy's character. It's a new character that gets a second spotlight episode, which very rarely happened in this era. I will take the wins. Number 6, Dirty Work. Written by Wayne Jackman, James gets ready to be the star of the Lights Festival at Callan Castle, and Emily, Percy and Thomas want to go too. However, they have not finished their work. And this is the second episode which steals the title from a classic Season 2 episode. One of my favourites. So you can imagine I was a little bit peeved that this title was taken. But it's nice to know that this episode didn't entirely suck. It's just more the fact they went for the literal definition of dirty work rather than the metaphorical version of dirty work, like they did with Season 2. Diesel's being scheming and mischievous and using dirty underhanded tactics to get Duck sent away. This one, James is literally getting dirty, doing work. But it makes sense for James's character, because what's one thing that we all know about James? He loves to be shiny and clean to show off his red paint. It's a good James episode, solid character work. Those flags make him look absolutely ridiculous, so I'm glad that he gets absolutely annihilated and gets really dirty. But overall, I would say this is a great episode. Number 5, Cool Truckings. Written by Paul Larson, a new lorry named Madge almost has a terrible accident in the snow while transporting Duncan to the transfer yards. Maybe this is why I didn't go with Peter, Sam and Duncan to pair with Madge and Washbinder Buffers, because Duncan and Madge were already used in this episode. But you know what? This is evidence as to why that should have been the characters used, because Duncan and Madge have a great chemistry in this episode. Once again, we're getting to see the island from the perspective of the roads, and we're getting to see it during a winter setting, which is also really great. I liked some of the skidding sequences, and it was quite tense when Madge was hanging over the edge. It looked like she was going to fall with Duncan at her back. It hit all the necessary story beats that you want an episode of Thomas and Friends to hit, while being enjoyable, entertaining, and fun to watch. And the title just inspired. Number 4, Sir Handel in Charge. Written by Simon Spencer, the Thing Controller is absent, so Sir Handel tells the other narrow gauge engines what to do, with disastrous results. This is a story that could have easily fit into Series 4 classic era. I like that it gives this new version of Sir Handel more expansion, another solid story for him to work off of. No character really feels out of place. It just shows that when the narrow gauge engine episodes were bad, they were stinking. But when they were good, they were thoroughly entertaining. Number 3, Gordon and the Engineer. Written by Paul Larson, Gordon's case of mistaken identity almost causes the engines to be stranded and needs Donald and Douglas's assistance. You know exactly why I like this episode. The two names at the end of that story description, Donald and Douglas. They were back, they were crucial to the plot of a story, and they were involved in a story that didn't suck. This is like jackpot for me. We all know that the Gordon-centric stories in the hit era were really well done, and this is another winner. None of the engines feel out of character, and just getting to see Donald and Douglas, especially when you know very soon you're not going to see them for a very long time in this franchise. We take the win. We hold on to those lovable Caledonian classics and we do not flippin' let go. Number 2, Emily's Rubbish. Written by Wayne Jackman, Emily gets teased by the other engines for working with a new engine named Whiff, but soon learns how useful he is. This is the iteration of Whiff that I like. He does not give two flying figs what anybody thinks about him. He doesn't care that he's smelly. He doesn't care that he's got a weird sounding whistle. And that's admirable. It's a great example for kids. Being different, it's okay. As long as you're happy with who you are, you don't need to worry about what anybody else thinks. And eventually, he proves that when he gets Spencer, the grandest douchebag of them all, to appreciate him. The pairing and dynamic of Emily and Whiff was also really good. Emily had this prissy, hoity-toity kind of image in this episode, and Whiff is the total opposite of that. And that very sped up chase sequence where every time Emily's trying to lose Whiff, he finds her, it would have been better if it was slowed down just a tad, but I understand why it was sped up to show the urgency of I have to get away from this guy. And seeing Gordon, James, and Henry and their typical Three Stooges classic era dynamic at this late stage in the game was so refreshing. They all felt in character, they all felt hilarious. I just didn't get why Neville, Molly, and Murdoch, of all engines, would be the ones that were making fun of this new engine. They've all been the new engine themselves and all been subject to the Steam Team ridicule. Molly and Neville in particular. So none of them should look down on Whiff. They should be embracing him and thinking, yes, someone that makes us look good. I would have been happy with any other engine, aside from Edward and Toby, in those roles. But not Molly and Neville. It's my only nitpick about it. But the number one episode, Thomas and Friends, season 11, is Hector the Horrid. Written by Simon Spencer, an aggressive coal hopper named Hector is rude to Bill, Ben, and Rosie, but Thomas learns of his secret fear. Bill and Ben have a cameo in it, Rosie has a cameo in it. I love Hector, I love his character. A lot of people like this character, because you find out that he is actually a gentle giant. And it does show you that fear can manifest in different ways. Some people hide into themselves, some people lash out. In this case, Hector would lash out. And it took Thomas standing up for Rosie to really drive this story home. I love this episode, and by far, best episode of Thomas and Friends, Season 11. Let me know in the comments how you would rank Season 11. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep on chugging.